Hi guys, we're going to talk about the installation of our Generation 2 interior harness. Now, we no longer support the Generation 2 kit, but a lot of guys have had questions, so I'm making this video. This will not apply to the Generation kit or to the new Generation 3 kit. You're going to get a lot of components that you're going to look at and say, well, what is all this? That's what I hope to straighten up here. So, let's start with the components, and then we'll move into how to hook them up. This is your GM BCM, body control module. This is your BCM harness, if you ordered the BCM package. This BCM harness connector will plug into your BCM, and this is going to plug into your Motec module. This is your Motec module. We're going to use this connector, and this center connector. These are used for firmware and software updates, so don't worry if you don't have connectors for those. This, actually I'll hook it up rather than tell you where that goes right now, but just know that these red connectors do go to the Motec module. Now, we have some other breakouts here and wires that I'm going to explain in a few minutes. This is your tap shift switch if you order tap shift, and that will be installed, I suggest, on the steering column right here, but you can put it wherever you want. This little harness is going to go up to your instrument cluster for air conditioning control. Put it aside. This is a Motec module harness that's going to go here, and hopefully your Motec module has a box on it. For this video I'm just using a bare one. Now let's talk about the main interior harness, which is what this is. This is your accelerator pedal position sensor connector. Okay, here's the main 15-pin Molex that comes through the firewall. Actually, the LS harness comes through the firewall. This is going to plug into it. This blue wire here is going to go to the brake switch. We'll talk about that in a minute. This is your BCM connector breakout. This black wire is your ground, data link connector, accelerator pedal position sensor. And finally, we have our Motec module connector. Now, if you have an additional 15 pin like this coming off the main interior harness 15 pin Molex, it also has a 4-pin flat Molex. Cut it off. You don't need it. This is for future use. This is for our Gen 3 electronics. So if you have this second 15-pin connector with the 4-pin Molex, throw it away. Cut off the wires, excuse me, and tape them cleanly. Okay, we'll be back in a second and I'll show you how this stuff hooks up. Okay, we're back. I've got most of the connections plugged in. Let's start here at the BCM. If you have the BCM package, you're going to have these 3 connectors that are going to plug into the 3 end connectors on the BCM. You're going to have this 6-pin BCM CAN bus connector that plugs directly into the main harness. This blue wire is a brake switch input. There's 2 brake switch inputs, one from the BCM and one from the main interior connector, which goes out to the ECM. As in the wiring legend, this one gets tapped into the brake switch blue-green wire. So the BCM goes to the blue-green wire. This ECM brake wire goes to the white-tan wire on the brake switch. Do not cut the wire in the brake switch. Strip it back and solder it on carefully and then insulate it. Now, the brake switch is kind of buried up in there, so I recommend you unplug it, drop it down, and then make your connections. The last connector on the BCM is the tap shift. You'll see this twisted pair of purple-red wires. This is just simply your tap shift connector. Mount it wherever you want. I suggest you put it in the column cover, but you can place it wherever you want. So let's move down the interior harness connector. Pretty obvious, this is your data link connector. You're going to mount it right underneath the Chrysler connector and use a couple of tie wraps, small tie wraps, get them real tight through these holes, and it will just sit there under the Chrysler connector and look pretty much factory. This black wire is your ground. There is a ground stud in the footwell that you can tap into. Maybe you can see it up here. Make sure you have a good tight ground. So let's go up. We already talked about this blue wire from the ECM. Goes to the white tan wire in the brake switch. This 15-pin Molex plugs into the main LS harness where it comes through the firewall. This is your accelerator pedal connector, basically your gas pedal. You're going to mount that up where the gas pedal goes, put some dielectric grease on this and snap it in tight. Be careful, these are tough to get in all the way. You have to push them pretty hard to make them click. The final connector on the main harness goes to the Motec module on the top. This is your power, your ground, your ignition, and some other inputs. Let's go to the next connector. This connector has most of the accessory inputs. So let's start with the black, red, and green. This is going to go over to your shifter. Now we've already wired this for you. There is a linear pot on the other side of this shifter that, let me lift it up and I'll show it to you. There's a linear pot that that tells the Motec module the shift lever position, and you're going to plug that into here. And these connectors can't be mixed because the gender and the number of pins won't allow you to. This 4-pin flat connector is your Prindle connector coming in from the C100 harness. We should have pre-wired that for you. It's in the engine compartment. You got to run it through the hole in the firewall, plug that into the Prindle connector. This blue-green wire with the connector should be about 3 feet of extra wire here, gets run up to the cluster. Let's see if I get some light here. In this C3 connector, you notice there's 3 connectors here. This is the one closest to our passenger side, the middle, and the one to the driver's side. Now if you're in South Africa, Australia, reverse that. Okay, so in this C3 connector, you will see in, see if I can zoom in, terminal 7 and 8 is blue and blue-green. Count from the left top here, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Blue and blue-green, okay? You're going to want to strip a little bit of insulation off those and tap our wires in. Now, the blue wire goes to the blue-green wire. The green wire, I'm sorry, the blue wire goes to the blue wire, and the blue-green wire goes to the green wire. Hope that didn't confuse you, because it confused me. Blue to blue, blue-green to blue. Alright, let's move on. The last connector in here is your instrument cluster. This does various things, and you will notice that it's plug and play with the instrument cluster. So you're going to plug that in, put your instrument cluster back after you make those other 2 connections. Now there's an additional wire coming out of this connector. This is your cruise control input. There's 2 ways this can be hooked up based on what you have. if you have a JK like this one, where your cruise control switch is on a stock, you're going to hook it up in this connector. This is the connector under the column that goes into the clock spring. You're going to hook it up to the end wire, which is purple with an orange tracer. It's this end wire right here, purple with the orange tracer. If your cruise control is on the steering wheel 11 and newer, you're going to hook our orange wire into the middle wire. That is the orange wire with the purple tracer. So not the purple wire with the orange tracer, the orange wire with the purple tracer. And I know that's confusing, but that's how Chrysler does it. Again, strip off some insulation, solder it carefully, and I do prefer solder, don't use Scotch locks. And then insulate it with some good friction or vinyl tape. Let's move down to the BCM connector, which goes back to the BCM, and that's pretty much it. This newer generation Motec module has a couple of lights. This light here is multicolored. When the ignition's on, it's green. When the ignition is off and it's in power down mode, it's red. When it's off, the power mode has been exited and the BCM has started its power down cycle. This blue LED is used for programming your Prindle. You're going to use this micro button to essentially learn each shift lever position. And you put it in each gear, push the button, the light blinks. Instructions are in the SLP instructions how to do this. Again, don't worry if this and this connector are bare. They're used for programming. The Motec module you get may not look like this because it will probably have an enclosure. So hopefully you can see the bare bones connection. And that's pretty much on the interior. Wrap everything up. And I do suggest that you leave everything here on the floor as you hook it up. Don't button it all up until the end, because you got to make sure your air conditioning, cruise control, and everything is working before you spend the time to mount it up. Now, what we normally do is we'll take the BCM, and on the back side we'll put a couple of strips of thick foam tape and then stick that up against the aluminum beam that's just above this footwell. That'll hold the BCM up there. Then take your Motec module with case, put some tape on the back side of that, and stick that to the BCM. Then run a tie wrap around the beam, the BCM, and the Motec module, and that'll keep it all up there nice and tight. Now, clean these wires up. Don't just let them hang down. If you route them nice and clean, it really makes for a nice install. Make sure when you mount the Motec module that you have access to the Prindle programming, because you're going to need to do that as a final step. And finally, get yourself a little magnetic tray to put all your parts in, all your nuts and bolts and tools. It makes for an easier install, in my opinion, and you're not losing parts and having junk all over. I see some customers struggle because they've really made more work for themselves by not staying organized. So get yourself a little tray to put all your parts in. And that's about it. You're going to put your shifter back on, your instrument cluster, make the 4 connections to the cluster, the 2 in the C3 connector, the 2 at the brake pedal. Those should be the only excuse me. Those should be the only solder connections in the interior if you have the BCM package. And then the rest, I hope, is pretty self-explanatory. It's virtually plug and play.